All right, so where we left off, we were putting the break in here to kick this down to the next line, and we just want to go in there, test it, and then as you can see, it's not done on this page. We have that horrible jumping header problem. So these two pages nice and solid when you move from one to another. Definitely don't want something like that on a website. So obviously the problem is with the favorites page, so we just go back to Dreamweaver, go on to the favorites, and make the change in here by putting in, again, it's easier sometimes just to swipe the mouse across there, so we find it down here, take that out, put in the BR, which is again one of those tags that opens but doesn't close. So now all three pages look similar in the header. This next one we're going to skip and come back to when we start working on the navigation links. But we have yet another one of those single tags that opens but doesn't closes, and that is the horizontal rule. And we're going to put one of those between the nav and the section and before the footer starts. So we're going to find out where we are between right before the section starts, which I'll just swipe the mouse in here, and yep, that's where we are. So right between the header and the section, go ahead, put a return in there, and then HR stands for horizontal rule. And you can see what that does is just puts a line across the page. Then we're also going to put one right before the footer starts. And I just need to do that on the other two pages. That's what that should look like in a browser. There's the horizontal rule that separates the header from the content, and then one that separates the content from the footer, which we haven't created yet. Next item here is to make the footer. And we want inside the footer, website by and your name. So let's copy that, go out into Dreamweaver and start to build. So let's start with the index page. And there's our footer. We're going to start with paragraph tag in there that contains that, and then let's close it, and then let's grab the other thing and paste it in there as well. So we're almost there, website by, and then I put in this fictitious name, you put in your name, and then copyright, the year, and then your name. Of course, I have to be consistent here. And then we need the copyright symbol at the beginning. So once again, you could Google or try the W3 schools, but that's a special character, and how I remember that in Dreamweaver is I find it under the insert menu. So I'm placing the cursor where I want the copyright symbol to go. I go to insert, and then I look for something that makes sense under here. And since it's a HTML thing, I go to HTML, and then I look for something that says, you know, to the effect of symbols, or and actually it's all the way down here. Oh, let me get my cursor back where it belongs. So again, it is insert, and then it's HTML, and then all the way down at the bottom, character, and then copyright. So you might want to take a look at that in case you need some of these in the future. That places this code in here, but when you preview it in the page, that's what it makes it produce. Put a little space there just to clean it up a bit, and then since I need this on all the pages, what I'm going to do is just copy from footer to footer, Command C. So I swiped across from the beginning footer to the closing footer, Command C, and then I'll just go into the next pages, and then I can just do the same thing, swipe from footer to start, footer to end, and then paste that in there, and saves me a little bit of work and makes it easy to paste it in place. So we've got all the new HTML requirements taken care of this one, but we'll get to it soon enough. And then under CSS, all CSS to be placed in one external style sheet. And so far that's what we're doing under this file named main.css and placed in this folder _styles. Logical use of CSS. I explained that earlier via the cascading. We wouldn't want to write a font color for every different place, like paragraphs H1 that the fonts use. We'll just put that in the bottom, or the body, sorry. And then we go to, if we need to override it locally, like we did for 1H1, and that's where we take care of that. Background and text colors, No black or white allowed on this site, and the reason is I want you to follow through from beginning and pick a color palette, and just to make sure you're on track, like really thinking about colors, I don't want any black or white, although white is very, very common on websites. But for this one, no. Okay, select 3 to 4 colors that go together to support your hierarchy. We talked about that earlier. And then I said do not copy my palette on here, but I actually want you to copy. In fact, I'm going to change the wording of that right now. Okay, so I changed that to say create your own color palette per the lecture, but also use my color palette on main.css. So I'll get to this soon enough, but you're going to take your colors and we're going to put them on a different style sheet. Okay, so far so good. Text, use relative font sizing, not absolutes, and relative font sizing is M's, and so far we've been on track with that. We talked about this bug fix. After that, all font sizes in M's, so yep, we're on track for that. Make the H1 3 times the default size, we already did that. Font stack, did that, and then line height of at least 1.4. So let's go ahead and address that. What does that mean? Now, some of you may be familiar with the term leading from print-based design, and what it refers to is the distance from this baseline, and a baseline is the imaginary line that type rests on, to this baseline. And as you can see, that if there was a little bit more space in here, it would be a little bit easier on the eye. So we'll go back to Dreamweaver, and since that's an absolute, I said minimum is 1.4. That applies to everything. So what we're going to do is we're also going to write that in the body. So one more to be added to the body. Now you'll be able to see as I finish this up, this space start to change in here. Line height is kind of its own entity. It's a number typically between 1 and 2, where 1 is the default, and so it's kind of like M. So if I say 1.4, it's going to be 140% of the normal, but you don't put M's after it. You just put a number like that, finish it off with the semicolon. So you can see that space is already opened up nicely, and I'm even going to increase that a little bit more, and that just makes it really easy to read on a website. You probably wouldn't want to go too much more because it might make things look like they're not connected to each other anymore, but somewhere around 1.4 to maybe all the way up to 1.8 seems to be pretty good. You can kind of start to appreciate the beauty of an external style sheet. All we had to do is write one line of code, but because all these pages are attached to the style sheet, they all have that same 1.6 line spacing, and thus they all look a little bit better, cleaner, easier to read. Before we move on to the last 3 items here, links, lists, and a little styling in the footer, let's tackle this issue right here. Let's change the text in the H1 in the About Me section to apply to this website. So the problem is that right now it says my first all HTML website. Well, that's no longer true. And I don't care if you do exactly what I do, but let's just make it make more sense. Okay, so what I've changed here is I changed the H1 to one of my first websites because that makes more sense since it's not just HTML. And then I changed this to this is my work in progress site. Right now I'm learning CSS. So that makes more sense. So that's the only change we need to make on the index page. I should say that this is the only place on any of the website that we need to make a change other than this H1 tag. So the H1 tag needs to be changed on all of the pages. So to make that easy, I can just swipe across here, Command C, and then go into the other pages and replace that entire H1. So let's move on and talk about styling our links. Now you can write, A is the HTML for a link, and you can style a link just like any other HTML element, but typically you want to take a little more control over it. And so it's A followed by a colon and then either link, visited, hover, or active. And these are known as pseudo selectors. So let's look at an example of what these would do. Probably the most important for a user experience is this hover state. So let's go ahead and address that one first. So we're going to go back to Dreamweaver, back into our CSS. And just like we did here to say that all of these are elements, let's go ahead, since we're moving on to things that are a little bit unique in these pseudo selectors, and since it all has to do with navigation, let's do a little housekeeping, and we'll make a new section here via a comment, and I'll change that to navigation. So keep in mind that has nothing to do with the code. That's commented out, but it just helps us when we're searching for things in our code. So let's go ahead and write this a hover. Same thing, start with the curly brackets, finish them off. Start with the color. We'll go up here, and I'm not sure yet which one I want to go with, so let's try the dark red. So we'll go ahead, copy that, come back down here, paste that in, finish it off with the semicolon, and let's try one other thing. Let's change it so that when the user hovers over the mouse that it also goes italic. So that is font style. And you can see Dreamweaver's helping us out quite a bit there. And then let's go ahead and preview this. In a browser, if this is done correctly, when I put my mouse over it, which is the hover, then it should change color, and it's also changing to italic. So that's working great. It's also working on all the other pages. And in the next video, we'll take care of these 3 other states.